we're anticipating some kind of significant escalation in the coming days, and they want to have the Doomsday plane available for the National Command Authority. One way or another, this is leading to regime change. In my opinion, the Iranians have been holding back. They've been trying to see what the Americans are going to do. But if we do strike the Iranian targets, they will strike back. The nuclear facilities are sort of a canard. The real threat are the underground missile cities that Iran has built up deep beneath the ground. The Israeli government is hiding the extent of damage. Tel Aviv has been pounded, and it's only getting worse. We know at least 30,000 people have already fled Israel via Cyprus. The Israelis are moving out. At some point, the gravitational pull of warfare becomes so great that it's very hard to pull back from this particular brink. This thing could spiral out of control fast, and it will destroy Trump's presidency. We will not have a golden age.
World War III is already happening.
This is a house of cards, and it is in the process of collapsing right now.
You're going to see an economic crash, the likes of which we've never seen.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here, back again with Brandon Wiechert, geopolitical analyst and author of Winning Space and the Shadow War. As tensions escalate across the Middle East, we're hoping that he's going to shed some light on this situation and help us read the tea leaves. Brandon, what is your assessment? Because the last time you were here, there were B-2 bombers at Diego Garcia, and we had anticipated at that time that things were going to escalate, but then they kind of cooled off a little bit. Trump went there for a visit, and now obviously things are flaring up again. What do you think is going to happen over the weekend? Is this just posturing, or is this the real deal?
Well, with Trump, you never know. He even said that yesterday in his press conference that he likes to wait till the very last minute before he decides. And I think he's being genuine when he says that. I think it really could go 50-50 either way. But there's a certain logic, and thank you for having me, by the way. But there's a certain logic here when you're talking about the kind of physical military assets that have been flooded into the region. At some point, the gravitational pull, if you will, of warfare becomes so great that it's very hard to pull back from this particular brink. Last time around, a month or two ago, he was able to pull back and sort of, put things on ice for about 60 days. I actually think that was part of the plan. I realize there's this sort of, war over the war right now in the American media. You've got Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson and sort of the MAGA crew trying to stop the Trump administration from following through on their threats. And the implication of their narrative is that, well, Trump is being pulled into an unnecessary war by Benjamin Netanyahu. I actually disagree with that. If you look at all of the evidence that's been arrayed so far, the Israelis can't take a dump in the Middle East without getting approval from the White House. In my opinion, if you look at from when the war began on Thursday, the way the Israeli airstrikes were so effective, the fact that we were completely supporting with logistical support the entire operation from beginning, middle to end, in my opinion, there's no way Trump didn't know about this. In fact, a source told me that John Ratcliffe's office at CIA was briefed at the end of March, beginning of April, about the specifics of the battle plan by Israeli intelligence. And the White House was also briefed on that, and Trump didn't raise any protest or whatever. And so, in my opinion, this is part of a larger running scheme that Trump has concocted with Netanyahu to prevent the Iranians from holding on or acquiring whatever nuclear weapons they've already built out. And so, in my opinion, what you're going to see is I think this weekend probably you're going to see that, because last night what happened was, he said 2 weeks, we're going to wait 2 weeks, and everybody thought, okay, we're good, diplomacy is going to get a chance here. What wasn't noticed by many of the MAGA influencers was a cluster of mid-air refueling tankers deployed out from California and ended up going out to Diego Garcia. And my understanding is those B-2 bombers that were originally placed on in Diego Garcia and then pulled out. They never actually went back to their home base in Whitman Air Base. They actually were kept in a holding pattern in California, I think at Edwards Air Force Base. And it is likely they deployed last night back to Diego Garcia with those refuelers for a weekend strike.
And that's actually consistent because the new Iranian chief of staff was giving an interview on Iranian media yesterday, and he indicated that the Iranians knew that the talks were going to fail and that it was all just a front, and that they had been anticipating a war since March, since around that time frame that you outlined. So it appears as though both are kind of playing along for the sake of portraying that they're trying to be good faith actors, but at the same time, realizing that the conflict, the kinetic aspect of things is likely inevitable. So I know you had recently talked in another podcast about some other findings in that National Security Council meeting that Trump partook in yesterday. Seymour Hersh claims that the attack plan is for this weekend, and he notes that the reason why is because Trump doesn't want to spook the markets. Yes. So come Monday, they can do this bombing run, whatever it is they're going to do. And then by Monday, things are going to die down so they can have a soft landing.
Yeah, Trump thinks that's the
it seems unlikely that would be the case. And I also know that Trump tends to be, with respect to the markets anyways, as we've seen, doesn't really care about the markets so much. Like we've seen that with the Chinese tariff stuff. Yeah. The markets were crashing and they didn't really care so much. What do you make of Seymour Hersh's take that this is going to happen this weekend?
Well, Cy is one of the best sourced journalists in the game. The left and the right hate him equally, which means he's probably always onto the right story. Mm-hmm. I would bank on Cy's story being correct. We know that Trump does monitor the markets. He likes to tout. Remember his first term, he'd always tout the market's doing so great. That's how I know my policies are working. So he is cognizant that a strike on Iran done in the week might destabilize the markets, and then he would lose the news cycle. That's another thing Trump is always worried about is the news cycle. How does he look in domestic news? So this is a smart move in terms of those two concerns. Try to give the market, you want to strike it after the markets have closed for Friday, and then you want to do it before the markets are going to open on Monday. A key thing to keep in mind is the USS Nimitz. That is the aircraft carrier that is currently maneuvering into the region from the Indo-Pacific. The Nimitz is not yet in a position. Is not yet in position to strike, or within striking range rather, of Iran. My opinion on this is it will be in position probably by Saturday night, Sunday morning, and that times well with the arrival of the B-2s into Diego Garcia. Because if I can just walk you through quickly the sort of what I think the battle plan is going to be, so your audience understands. I think they're going to use a pair of B-2 bombers coming out of Diego Garcia. They will be armed each with 2 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators. So that's the 30,000-pound bomb that everybody thinks we need to collapse the nuclear facility at Fordo. They
can carry one of those each.
I believe it's 2 each. I thought, but you might be right about that.
No, I don't know. I'm just asking.
I think it's 2 each that they can carry. They will fly into southern Iran, escorted by EA-18G Growlers and FA-18EF Super Hornets deployed from the USS Nimitz. The Growlers and the Super Hornets will provide cover for the B-2s as they enter hostile airspace. The Growlers will conduct what's known as SEAD, S-E-A-D, that's suppression of enemy air defenses, so electronic warfare directed against radar tracking and any missile facilities. The FA-18 Super Hornets will provide sort of a bodyguard against any aerial attack, but also they will conduct what's known as DEAD, DEAD, destruction of enemy air defenses, to create a hole for the B-2s to fly safely through as they approach the target. I suspect the target is Fordo. The B-2s will then angle for their attack. They will deploy. These are gravity bombs they're using. So these don't have rockets. Okay, these are dumb bombs. Now we've equipped them with certain equipment like a laser. You have to have a team on the ground lasing the target. I have heard rumors that Delta Force has been deployed into Fordo, although I also know Israeli elite units are crawling all over that part of Iran. Some friendly element will have to be on the ground to laze the target at Fordo to make more accurate the incoming bomb. The planes are going to have to come in on a certain angle,
So
though.
how far do they have to be from that to use the laser?
They have to be. I mean, they'll be within a safe distance, but they have to be relatively close to kind of get.
So
it
don't
into
you think
target.
the Iranians would have that whole area?
Well, my understanding is that the Israeli elite forces are already all over the ground. They've probably already picked off the people they need to. I mean, we don't really know what's. I can't pretend to know what's going on the ground. This is all hearsay that I'm
Well,
getting.
one of the things too is if you have a failing economy in Iran, there's always going to be the possibility that you say to somebody, hey, your family's struggling. How about make $1 million? We'll pay you to do this. Like there's always, everybody has a price, I guess.
Yeah.
So I think that's how they could potentially compromise people. But sorry, go ahead.
No, you're right. You're right. And we know that Israeli intelligence has a lot of Iranian agents in Iran at the highest levels because of just that sort of method of operation. As for the strike itself, though, they're going to use the GBU 57s. They're going to try to hit it in a way where it collapses the facility completely with a minimal risk of radiation leakage. I don't know if that's going to work, but that's what they're trying to do. What you're going to see also is about 48 hours ago, a cluster of F-22 Raptors, and I know we've got F-35 Lightning II birds on site. These are our fifth-generation warplanes. They're going to be shadowing that American attack force in Iran. They're going to be shadowing it across the border in friendly Saudi Arabia and friendly or relatively friendly Iraqi airspace. They will be on standby if things get really hot that the Super Hornets and the Growlers can't handle. Then we'll have additional fighters, the fifth-generation birds, flying in to better protect the B-2s. Once the B-2s deploy their package, they will quickly try to leave Iranian airspace, traveling a northern route. They will try to make it out of Iranian airspace. Those Super Hornets and Growlers will depart and likely return back to the Nimitz in the south, where the F-22 and F-35s will likely join up with the B-2s as they leave Iranian airspace. You'll notice that we have a cluster of mid-air refuelers in the northern Middle Eastern region along the Mediterranean. The B-2s will likely refuel with one of those refuelers and continue on back to Whitman Air Force Base, taking the European northern route around back down into the United States. That is how I think this is going to play out. The questions that need to be asked, and I hope the president's asking them, what is the risk that we are not able to fully destroy this facility? This facility in Fordo is heavily, it's hardened, it's deep underground, and I was told by an engineer that the actual geology of the site is such that it messes with the fusing mechanism on our bombs. So there's a chance we could drop this thing and maybe it doesn't go off, or it doesn't go off the way it's supposed to, which means we'd have to do a restrike. And I know that we have more than just two B-2s at moving into Diego Garcia, so we might have to do it over again. But there's also the risk that Trump is going to, I think this would be fine, but I think the Israelis think it's a risk. Trump's going to do this strike. He's going to say, okay, I did my part. Good luck, Israel. And if the Israelis believe that the nuclear sites remain intact, they may very well decide to deploy a tactical nuclear weapon to collapse the remnant, because that will take out that facility. But I don't believe that President Trump will seek to deploy a low-yield nuclear weapon, even though that would be the most effective weapon, because he doesn't want to be the guy that lets the nuclear genie out of the bottle. But the Israelis certainly would be open to that if they feel that the Americans are either not committed enough or are not effective enough in getting the Fordo and other nuclear sites out of the way, especially because the weapons in question, the GBU 57s, have never been deployed in combat. They've never been tested in combat. So these things might not work as anticipated.
Yeah, let's talk about the geology of that because from what I know and basic Wikipedia knowledge would dictate that this won't work, that these facilities are 90 meters deep.
Yeah.
And that's what we know. And we don't really know all of the details. Maybe they have intelligence, they have detailed maps of what's really going on inside there. But if the massive ordnance penetrator only has a depth penetration of, I think it's 30 meters.
Yeah.
Realistically, this just doesn't seem like it's going to work. So, I mean, where would the placement of where would they send it?
In terms of the specifics of that, I don't feel like I'm comfortable in talking about that. I don't know enough about what's going on the ground there, but I can tell you that I think one of the reasons they're going to have a team on the ground trying to laze the target is because the Israelis have been hitting Fordo and Natanz and some of these hardened facilities since last Thursday. They've been using 3,000 and 5,000 pound bunker busters. They have done damage to the Iranian nuclear facilities. So I suspect. Surface and subsurface, right below the surface. Right. I suspect the ground team will try to help the bombardier target more precisely those already damaged parts so that it can get down deeper. But your question about how effective, you're completely correct. We don't know how effective this will be, which is why I'm very concerned. Once we initiate the strike, Trump's either going to be faced with a question: are you going to go in with a restrike? Will that even work again? Because the Iranians are not stupid. They will readjust their defense parameters. Furthermore, if that doesn't work, if we know the GBU-57 just can't work no matter what, does that mean we open the nuclear genie? And I think once we're committed, if not us, and I don't think it would be us, I think the Israelis are going to say, you know what, we're done. We're not going to let this drag out. We're going to hit them now, especially because, according to my reporting, Iron Dome is running low on ammunition, and the Iranian missile salvos that they're firing at Israel are getting more destructive and more accurate. I don't believe Israel can sustain a long-term war with Iran of this nature. They have to see this nuclear facility threat go away, and more importantly, the Israelis very much are planning to do a regime change mission, which, by the way, will suck the Americans in more, which is why I think the people who are questioning Trump on the right are right to question him, because he cannot possibly know that this will be contained to just a pinprick strike. This could escalate significantly. It could ruin his presidency.
Yeah, I think pinprick is the appropriate terminology there. A lot of this buildup, you're really telegraphing what you're going to do. So is this misdirection? Because based on what we've seen thus far, they're attempting to make it appear as though that's where they're going to focus their efforts. I saw a report on Fox News, so take it for what it's worth, yes, but that there was another facility. I can't remember what it was called. The translation is the Rainbow Facility or something like that, which I thought was kind of odd. But that's where the real, nuclear weapons potential
certainly
is located. So is this all just theatrics? And because it just seems like, okay, you're letting them know exactly what you're going to do. So obviously they're going to be hyper vigilant in that particular region. Yep. Meanwhile, something else is being cooked up.
You could be very right. I mean, deception is a key component of the art of war. And if my theory that Trump was involved with the very deep plannings of the initial strikes last week is correct, and I think it is, then we know that the President Trump is a very deceptive person when it comes to the military side of things. So there is a target list they have, not just Fordo. There is a set of possible targets. I have advised people I know who are close to the White House. I would hope, and how I put it was, I would hope you're not prioritizing those nuke sites, because the nuke sites are no longer really that important. If you're worried about security in the region, the real threat are the underground missile cities that Iran has built up deep beneath the ground. The first targets of any potential deep airstrike should actually be taking out those missile arsenals underground, because those are the biggest threat to U.S. bases in the region. And obviously, as we're seeing, it's the biggest threat to Israel. The nuclear facilities are sort of a canard. They're a problem, but in my opinion, the missile complex is underground, which should be the first thing struck if we have to go in at all. And again, I truly hope that some kind of off ramp can be found, because this thing could spiral out of control fast, and it will destroy Trump's presidency. We will not have a golden age.
Do you think that they know all of the deep underground bunkers in around the locations, or is there some potential, places where they could be hiding these things that they're not aware of?
There's always a chance, the fog of war. I would say we probably know most of them, because we have concentrated on this target set for so many years, and the Israelis certainly know. In fact, I would argue that when it comes to actual targeting intelligence, the Israelis probably have a better understanding of it than we do, and I'm sure they're feeding in their targeting intelligence to our to our military and our intelligence services. I think we probably can get most of the targets we want, but again, it's not going to knock out the Iranian threat, and the Iranians are probably going to still have some moves they can make. In my opinion, the Iranians have been holding back. They've been trying to see what the Americans are going to do. And I think they've really held back on attacking us because they don't want to rope Trump in, knowing full well that that's probably the end of the regime. But if we do strike the Iranian targets, they will strike back. We have a carrier, which is, I think it's interesting, by the way, they're flooding in, I think, 2 or 3 aircraft carrier groups. And I know that the third one is coming in, the Ford, which is our most advanced, expensive carrier, newest carrier. They're flooding that in, but they're going to keep it in Europe. They're going to keep the more advanced carriers out of the range of potential.
When you say Europe, where in Europe? Like
it's going to be probably the Med, it looks like, or they're going to keep it they're going to try to keep it as far away from the range. They'll keep it nearby where if they need to move it in quickly, they can, but they're going to keep it outside of the range of Iranian and Houthi anti-ship ballistic missiles. The Nimitz is our oldest carrier. It's set to be retired within, I think, the next 12 months. If you look at the Nimitz, it's rusting out. I mean, it's very much a bucket of bolts these days, which is sad because it's such a storied carrier, but it's on its last legs. That they're going to park that thing right within range of Iranian anti-ship missiles. We could see the loss of a carrier, if that's the case, as part of Iran's retaliation. And we know that the Chinese, probably the Russians too, are using their satellites to help the Iranians range targets in Israel. And if we enter the war, I wouldn't be surprised if they help range targets, American targets. And we know that the Chinese were doing this with the Houthis. They were providing very, very targeted, very good targeting intelligence from their satellites to the Houthis. That's why we lost almost 3 times in the last 2 years, carriers to the Houthis.
On the topic of tactical nuclear weapons, because that is now entering the discourse, I've somewhat suspected that perhaps they're putting this out there so that when Trump finally decides to make a decision, like the conversation has moved from will they do it to how will they do it?
Yes, and when.
And when will they do it? Exactly. So if, they float the idea of tactical nuclear weapons, people, recoil in fear about the prospect of that. Then they can say, okay, well, we won't use nuclear weapons. Right. We'll try these conventional weapons. But like you're saying, they won't work. Then they'll get
they might not work. I'm not saying they won't work. They might not work. We've never tested these weapons in real combat. So, we might get lucky.
Yeah, I'm not convinced just because just the simple physics of it. I mean, these things are, it's 90 meters of granite. It just, maybe they'll collapse the entranceways.
Yeah.
But they got dozers in there. How long does it take to clean it up? Are they going to keep hitting it? Are they going to make it untenable? Who knows?
Right.
But okay, so the tactical nuclear weapon thing. You suspect that will work, and you're saying that the Israelis are going to do it. Well, we know that the U.S. is quite interoperable with Israel, so I don't think that they would do it unless the U.S. approved it, obviously. So really, an Israeli nuclear attack is
you're definitely right
to a U.S. Nuclear attack. What do you think what do you think the response from Iran is going to be? Are they just going to roll over and play dead on Monday?
No. This is why I say I think once we initiate we as in the United States directly initiate, bombings and whatnot. Whatever Trump is thinking, and I think he may genuinely believe this is going to be a pinprick strike, it's not going to be a pinprick strike.
Right.
This is going to lead, because what's going to happen is the Iranians are still there. The Iranians are not going to be able, I mean, again, maybe we get lucky and they surrender and they do what Trump is saying, unconditional surrender. I doubt it, given the ideology of the regime. I doubt it. So what's I think is going to happen is, one way or another, this is leading to regime change. And the Israelis really think the Shah's son, Reza, who's a Washington, D.C. lobbyist, they really think he's going to be their answer. And I hope he is. He's a good guy. But ultimately, I don't know what level of support he has in Iran. And I just can't imagine that he has the kind of support they're saying he does. So all this is going to do is the Iranians will strike back. They have a lot of capabilities that we have not yet seen. They have hypersonic weapons. They just deployed the medium-range ballistic missile 48 hours ago, and I'm forgetting it's the
two-stage missile.
Sharam Shar, I think 4 is what it's called. Mm-hmm. And I have a source on the ground in Tel Aviv who sent me some pretty amazing stuff. I've been asked not to post it because he could get arrested. But Tel Aviv was hit much harder. The Israeli government is hiding the extent of damage. Tel Aviv in particular has been pounded, and it's only getting worse. And I think what the Iranian plan was to fire lesser missiles to drain the Iron Dome of its ammo. And now that they know it's draining, and it's going to be drained, and we can't sustain resupplying them, they're going to start upping the ante with their more advanced missiles. So we could see, after an American strike, the Iranians are going to respond with more advanced missile swarms. And that's going to cause a lot of and they're going to respond also not just to Israel. They will target American bases and, like I said, ships. I mean, we could lose a carrier. This thing it could escalate greatly, which will only force us to get more involved.
And that's a nuclear carrier, isn't it?
It's all of our carriers are nuclear powered. Yeah.
So that's
they don't carry nuclear weapons, but they're nuclear powered. Yeah. Yeah.
So if that were to happen and they sunk a carrier that was nuclear, that would be a radiological incident unto itself.
It would be an environmental disaster. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's 5,000 sailors on board and Marines, and I'm sure we would lose a lot of them. And there are defenses both on the carrier and the battle group around it. But ultimately, the way the Iranians and the Chinese and the Russians and the North Koreans, even the Venezuelans, are starting to take this on. The way that these rival countries look at it is they know the carrier is our primary form of power projection. So what they do is they create missile swarms that can just overwhelm the defenses of the carrier and its attendant battle group. And we saw that against the Houthis. The Houthi war that we lost is a great warning to American policymakers who really want to get us into a kinetic war right now, that the Iranians have moves they haven't yet employed. Some of the reason they haven't employed them is partly because the Israelis were more effective than they had even thought they would be in damaging the missile complexes and suppressing some of these systems. But the Iranians are adapting now to the battle, and they're starting to punch back harder, which means that they're coming back online. And if America gets involved, this thing's going to escalate.
What about so with respect to
I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely. Okay. In terms of their striking U.S. military bases, there's been a few bases that have been evacuated, at least of their, taking the planes off the tarmac and moving the ships out of the ports. So you suspect that after this strike, if it is deemed that the Americans are party to the conflict and complicit in the strike, that the Iranians are going to attack U.S. military bases. Do you think it would be something like that happened with Soleimani, where the Trump administration allowed for a Pyrrhic retaliation and basically just, go for the nuclear facilities, let the Iranians hit the American military bases, and that be the end of it? Or is this thing going to continue to escalate to regime change with Israel regardless?
I think it's escalating to regime change no matter what, because the Israelis are not going to drop that. The regime change is really coming from Israel, and they are not, let's say the strike goes all according to plan, nuclear sites are no more. That seems to be Trump's goal. The Israelis have said since August of last year, their goal is regime change. They have not stopped saying that since last August. They are not going to just stop. Okay, the nuclear threat's gone. No, they're going to keep pushing, pushing, pushing. And so, in terms of the retaliation, I think you will see some of what you saw with Soleimani. But I want to tell you what's keeping me up at night. The potential for Iran to sabotage or blockade or disrupt the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is one of, and I'm seeing the map to your left, that waterway there. That is the Strait of Hormuz. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. That is the Strait of Hormuz, and that is one of 7 world oil choke points, any one of which, if they get blockaded for any period of time, will cause the price of oil on the global market to spike. And the Iranians have already said earlier this week that they are preparing, if we go forward with this strike, the United States, they will retaliate by closing the Strait of Hormuz. Now, ultimately, the U.S. Navy could probably punch through it and reopen it, but even a 24-hour closure of the strait, according to most economic analysts, will cause the price of oil per barrel to go up anywhere between $150 to as high as $300 a barrel. So for Donald Trump, if anybody in the Trump administration is listening, consider this. Trump has tried very hard to pressure Jerome Powell to lower those Fed rates because he says, hey, I've got inflation down. You got to lower rates now. And Jerome Powell won't do it. Well, I think one of the reasons, and I'm not a fan of Jerome Powell at all, but one of the reasons I think Powell won't do it is because any economist knows if the price of oil skyrockets like we're talking about, inflation will come back. So he's just going to keep those rates relatively high because he's assuming that Trump's going to get us into a war. The Strait of Hormuz is going to get closed and we're going to have massively high. And so the Trump economic policies, which have been very effective so far, will be reversed if what I'm thinking is going to happen in the next 2 or 3 moves.
Interesting. Yeah, we had a guest on Doomberg talking about the prospect of closures of Strait of Hormuz. So it'll be interesting to see if that's able to materialize. I mean, we've seen the Houthis definitely have an impact on the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. So we could presume that the Iranians with presumably 10x the capability would be able to, and naval drones as well, would be able to do some damage in that respect. Maybe let's talk a little bit more about the impacts on Israel, because you're saying that the damage is more severe than they're letting on. Now, I know I on the channel I talked probably about a week ago, the IDF put out a communique to various media agencies that it was now illegal to post, various materials for national security reasons. What do you think the extent of the damage is there? And in terms of the exhaustion of their missile defense, is it just the Iron Dome or is it the Arrow, the THAAD? How many THAADs have been used, would you estimate? Because I know there's a very limited supply of those.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, the 2 questions are related and they're interlinked. In my opinion, you've noticed in the last 72 to 96 hours, Iranian missile strikes have become more damaging and more precise. That's partly because the Iranians are using more and more advanced weapons, but that correlates directly with the significant decline in available ammunition stores, not just for the American THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, but for all of the attendant systems in Israel's air defense network: Iron Dome, David's Sling, David's Arrow, THAAD. All of these systems are being drained precipitously. The THAAD system in particular, and that's considered America's most advanced air defense system, the THAAD system in particular relies on ammunition stores from the United States. Now, about 3 days ago, I tracked a C-17 Globemaster coming into upstate New York, which is where the main armory we have for that holds most of the THAAD systems, the THAAD ammunition. They landed at the facility. They obviously loaded up with ammunition, and they hightailed it over to the Middle East, to Israel. And I believe they probably restocked whatever. But I was told that facility in upstate New York was already running precipitously low, and our defense industrial base cannot make up the difference in a reliable time frame because of just how ridiculous our defense industrial base is. And the reason that those systems have been drained mostly rests on the shoulders of Volodymyr Zelensky and Ukraine, because Ukraine's been using the THAAD system quite a bit in the ammunition.
Oh, they have. I didn't realize they were using the THAAD. I thought they were just using the Patriot.
They've been using a lot of and it isn't just the THAAD. Most of the systems Israel needs, the Israelis have been, I'm sorry, not the Israelis, Ukrainians have been pulling on our stockpiles. But basically, that's an added problem for Israel, is that, they have their own stockpiles. They've blown through most of them. So then they turn to the Americans, and it turns out the cupboards are becoming increasingly bare here. And you're seeing then the damage increasing, obviously, to Israeli cities because they can't shoot these things down. And by the way, that's not to include, the Iron Dome and all these systems are very good systems, but they also are imperfect. They're human built. So any human system is not foolproof. So even on a good day, given the operational tempo now of the Iranian strikes, some of the Iron Dome systems and some of the David Slings and all these other ones, they miss sometimes. That just happens. I mean, you're trying to shoot a missile with a missile. It's very hard. And the coverage is, they have good coverage, but it's not foolproof. So my point is that my argument, and I think the Washington Post of all places, they did the percentage breakdown. 3 or 4 days ago, the Iron Dome's effectiveness or accuracy was around 90%. By yesterday, that's Thursday, June 19th, the report in the Washington Post said it was down to 62 or 63% accuracy. So that's 30% in 3 days. So what that indicates to me, if trends persist, without American intervention to kind of break up the Iranian assault, I believe that you will continue to see a 30 to 40% decline in accuracy of Iron Dome. You'll see the depletion of all the systems for Israel's air defenses over the next couple of weeks. And you just do the math, you can tell when they're going to be down to 0% accuracy if these trends persist. Meanwhile, the Iranians have many, many missiles of increasing complexity they can launch, and many of them are kept deep underground in these bunkers, which is why I said if the B-2s are going to really be effective, they probably don't want to even deal with the nukes right now. Go after those missile complexes underground, because I think we could probably get them. But they're not doing that. From what I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I mean, obviously, I don't know the internal makeup of the war plan, but it sounds a lot like they're focusing on the nuke sites, which means that Israel is going to be continually blasted by these increasingly sophisticated, deadly missiles with a decreasing reliability of their air defense network.
And interestingly, I'm sure you've seen the graphs that show that the amount of missiles fired have been declining. So in addition to, using more accurate hits, and in addition to, so that increases the ratio even more is what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
So
it's interesting too, though. I mean, because I've always doubted the Israeli number. The Israelis, I think, assessed before the war began, and I think these are too low, these numbers, but they assessed officially that I think it was Iran had 3,000 missiles, and they've so far blown through about 400 to 800 of them. Mm-hmm. And if you're to believe the Israeli numbers, you would have to think, looking at what's happening with Israel's Iron Dome and their AD systems and the rate at which Iran is popping off missiles, this is almost a race to the bottom. This is almost like a war of depletion. Who's going to run out first?
Run out of conventional weapons.
Yes, of course. Of course.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting to see, because this, I don't believe, was the Israeli plan of attack. I don't think this was what they wanted to see happening, but that is what's happening now.
Yeah, they went for that swift decapitation strike, which was quite successful from their point of view. But
it was. Honestly, it was a tactical success. The Israelis, whether you like Israel or not, the Israeli, specifically their intelligence networks, should really be patted on the back, because it was Israeli intelligence penetration of Iran leading into the attack that was extremely effective. That led to the initial very big successes of their tactical campaign. Now, of course, things are shifting now, as they do in war, but the Israeli opening certainly was impressive by any means. They will be teaching that in military history courses for decades to come.
It seems like one of the casus bellis will be, we have to come to Israel's defense because they're running out of air defense. I can foresee that being in the chief of the Israeli military today said that prepare for a longer war.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you do the math, then Tel Aviv is going to start to look like the Gaza Strip over a long enough timeline.
Yes.
What do
It's
you,
already starting to look like that.
yeah. And
If
I
the
mean,
pictures I received today are any indication.
yeah, and it's tough. Like there's a lot of there's the fog of war is thick, and there's AI now too, which
Yep.
really complicates things. And some of the AI is getting really good and convincing. Yesterday, it was alleged that the Iranians were at least engaged in some rhetoric around targeting the Dimona nuclear plant.
Yeah.
Is that a legitimate? Well, not a legitimate, but is that a prospective target? Do you think?
Oh yeah, I think that's well. I know that the Iranians, very early on in the war, sent some missiles that way. I was told by one Israeli source, I have no confirmation, that the facility was struck with an Iranian missile, either directly or indirectly. I know for a fact that the Iranians absolutely are view that as a legitimate target in their minds. Now, the rest of the world, I don't think agrees, and we saw the pushback in the Ukraine war, where supposedly the Russians were targeting the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. Of course, there's an argument as to whether that was a false flag or whatever. But the point is, I think the rest of the world views a strike on a nuclear reactor as an act of very significant war and unacceptable. But Iran views that as a legitimate target. And because in their mind, hey, you're targeting our nuclear facilities, we can do the same to you then. And this is tit for tat.
What about the Iranian air defense? Because it doesn't appear to be working, mind you. It's a big country. And so, do you believe that they were able to shoot down F-35s?
No, no. And that's not because I'm a fan of the F-35. If anybody spent any time reading my work, I'm one of the biggest critics of the F-35. I think it's a boondoggle. But no, they didn't shoot down any F-35s. What happened, and this gets back to what I said about Israeli intelligence penetration of Iran in the weeks and months leading up to the war. The Israelis, basically last October, you'll remember the Assad regime falls in Syria, and Israel immediately moved in and took a significant portion of territory in Syria. And they basically created an air corridor linking their territory over Syria into Iraq, into Iran. In October of last year, they launched a massive sortie of F-35Is and F-16Is with intentions to do this war then. Mm-hmm. And what happened was they sent sort of a probing force in, and they did blow up some S-300 Russian-made air defense systems. But what they found was, the Iranian air defenses are more comprehensive and more sophisticated and more lethal than what we realized. So they immediately canceled the larger strike that was planned. They claimed it was a victory, and they went back home. What they did from October until last week was they basically sat around, the Israeli Air Force did, figuring out how do we disrupt Iranian AD networks so that we can accomplish these strikes that we saw last Thursday. And that was part of that intelligence penetration of Iran. What I was told is that Israeli intelligence went into Iran very early on after those October strikes and began sabotaging Iranian AD systems, either physical sabotage or in many cases electronic cyber sabotage. And that is one of the reasons why the Iranian AD network, which on paper is very impressive actually, the Iranian AD network has just really not been that successful.
So like if you were to estimate what those capabilities were and to the extent that they've been attrited thus far, where do you see Iranian air defense at this point in time? Is it still quite effective? Are they utilizing S-300 or S-300 equivalents? Do they have an S-400 system that they're holding on to for a war with a bigger war? Could they be holding out some of their better air defense in anticipation of an American strike?
That is probably the fact of the matter, yes, is that they're holding out. I think they probably do have the S-400. They might even have some of the S-500, though I don't know that for sure. We just know how close their relationship with Russia was, and so you can probably assume safely they probably have more Russian systems that are more advanced than they're letting on. The Iranians built a relatively sophisticated indigenous system, the Bavar think 346, which is equivalent to it's basically a clone of the S300. I believe they were cloning the S400 as well. So they have indigenous systems. I would argue, and this is by no means a scientific assessment, but I would just sort of spitballing here based on what I've seen. I would say the Israelis were managed to attrite at least probably 40% of the Iranian AD systems. I wouldn't say more than that just to be safe, because we don't really know what the Israelis did, and we don't know how long lasting the Israeli sabotage is. Did they permanently destroy these systems, or did they just hack these systems and mess with the operating system so that Iranian engineers could eventually come in and clean out whatever the Israelis did and repair the damage? We don't know the extent of that. Obviously, the Iranians aren't going to let us know, and the Israelis, of course, are going to trump up what they did because they want to have a information war victory. But I would say, to be safe, we could probably assume 40% attrition of Iranian AD systems, which still leaves them a lot of capabilities, especially if the Americans get involved, which I think we are.
If the Israelis choose to use tactical nuclear weapons, is that the B-61? Is that where
it would be the equivalent of that? The Israelis have their own. They don't have American nukes. Okay, they have their own versions of American nukes, and obviously they pilfered our original nuclear systems through industrial espionage and whatever else with the 1960s, that whole story. But they have about, my understanding is, anywhere from 200 to 400 nuclear weapons. They don't just have nuclear weapons in silos. They have nuclear-tipped cruise missiles sitting on Dolphin-class diesel-electric submarines, which I suspect are all sitting off the coast of Iran. So if they're going to do a nuclear strike, I wouldn't be surprised if they deployed a nuclear-tipped cruise missile from one of the Dolphin-class submarines at one of these targets we're talking about in Iran. Interesting.
And what do you think the likelihood of something like that is, presuming that, I suspect, and many suspect, that the conventional approach is not going to work if they can't accomplish that or regime change? How does this end? Is there any scenario where Israel just kind of backs off of this, or is this already a fait accompli?
Well, I think as long as Netanyahu is in power, they will keep doubling down. And that's less because of strategic needs and more because, let's face it, Benjamin Netanyahu, even before the 10/7 terror attacks, was politically at risk because of the corruption charges and all the scandals. He kept doubling down after 10/7 because he was trying to avoid accountability from the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. He was trying to avoid accountability from Israeli voters, many of whom are rightly upset with Netanyahu, not just over what's going on in Tel Aviv, but over the 10/7 terror attacks. Remember, Netanyahu was aware that there was something coming, and he didn't act in time. He didn't act well. And so everything you've seen since that point on, with all the wars Israel's been involved in, has been a story of Netanyahu doubling down and opening multiple fronts, the final front being Iran. That's a distraction for the voters and the upset parliament and whatnot. He's trying to avoid accountability. So ultimately, and he's banking on being able to tell the Israeli people, yeah, I know you're mad at me. Yeah, I know I had some failures, but I just took out the Iranian regime, our greatest threat since Hitler. So you can't get rid of me now. But if he can't say that, then he's in trouble. So he's going to keep pushing for, he's going to try to put all the toothpaste back in the tube. He's going to try to take out the entire Iranian regime, whether Trump wants him to or not. He does not care.
What have you heard about egress from Israel? Are people leaving?
Oh, yeah. They're fleeing in droves. Again, this is another thing the Israeli government is covering up. This is part of that media blackout. They are moving out tens of thousands. Apparently 30,000 people we know at least 30,000 people have already fled Israel via Cyprus. The Israelis are moving out. I saw a Twitter interview with a bunch of Israelis that had just arrived at the Cypriot airport, and they asked the reporter, or the person interviewing them asked, where are you headed? And the guy said, I'm going home. And he said, "You're going back to Israel already?" He goes, "No, no, no, no." He goes, "My home is New York, and we're all going back to New York." So they are already repatriating, which should tell you, I think, what they think is going on. And look, you're seeing in the streets the smattering of reports that do make it out. I just witnessed a horrible fist fight between a group of Israeli citizens whose homes were just blown up, attacking IDF soldiers who were trying to help them clean up the mess, yelling, "You did this. You didn't have to strike Iran. This is your fault," yelling at these poor young soldiers. It's not them. It's not their fault. It's their commander in chief, Benjamin Netanyahu, put them in this position. But ultimately, it is not going well for Israel. To be fair, in Iran, they're also fleeing. In fact, I suspect the Ayatollah and many of the senior leaders have already fled the country, either to China, Russia, or Qatar. I don't believe the Ayatollah is still in Iran. I really don't.
Wow. I mean, I know I've seen...
I don't have proof of that, though. That's just my theory.
I've seen some footage of Israelis fighting over bunker space, which I found was interesting considering...
I was told they're getting so stingy about bunker space that if you're Christian and if you're a foreigner visiting Israel, you are being denied access to the bunkers. So again, that's unconfirmed, but it wouldn't surprise me because it is so desperate there, right? There's a million. I was told 2 days ago, before that Iranian medium range ballistic missile hit Tel Aviv, I was told that almost 1 million people were underground at that point, waiting for the strikes to come. I mean, you want to talk about forget about the physical destruction. Tel Aviv is a major economic hub. And I just saw a massive mushroom cloud, non-nuclear, over Haifa, which is the big port, which is the beating heart of Israel's economy. And these areas are being shut down, and they're going to be offline for weeks and months the longer this war goes on, which means the Israeli economy is going to collapse.
Mm-hmm. Nobody's going to want to invest. I just got some news here that according to Al Jazeera, Netanyahu says that Iran still has 28,000 ballistic missiles.
Yes, which would gel. That's interesting because that would gel with what one of my guys, who's a retired DIA guy, he told me that the Israeli intelligence assessments on their missile capabilities are completely off. He said 20,000. That's why I was bringing up the missile complexes underground. I think he's probably right. And if Netanyahu's now changing his tune on that, that means the Israelis are realizing that they opened a can of worms that they can't possibly contain.
Right. And the only way that they're going to be able to suppress that fire is with the help of the United States.
Yes, but I don't see any indication. And I could be wrong. They're not going to tell me their battle plans, but I don't see any indication that Trump is going to blow up the underground missile complexes. It looks like he's really focused on the nuclear sites, which I think is a mistake. I don't think the nuclear, and I've always thought the nuclear weapons threat is a problem, but it's a canard. It's a canard for regime change, and it's a canard for ignoring the bigger immediate threat to Israel and U.S. bases and ships, which are those underground missile complexes.
So you don't think the Iranians already have nukes, and you think that the Ayatollah has fled the country?
I don't know if the official U.S. intelligence position that Tulsi Gabbard testified to in March is that the Iranians gave up their nuclear ambitions in 2003. I actually always thought they did have a handful of rudimentary nukes. The issue was they couldn't mate them to missiles because they lacked miniaturization. And I have seen absolutely no evidence to indicate that they have miniaturization capacity. And if you have a handful of nukes that are rudimentary and you can't mate them to a missile, that means you're going to have to physically, drive them or walk them into the target like a dirty bomb scenario. The Israelis have a pretty good security cordon that can probably be detected. They have nuke sniffers and whatnot, radiological detectors. I don't see any evidence that the Iranians have tried moving nuclear, weapons, through traditional means. But if they lack the delivery systems, as advanced as their missiles are, and they are, but if they lack the miniaturization capacity, well, then even if they had a handful of nukes, it doesn't really matter. Plus, Israel has like 200 or 400 very advanced nuclear weapons. So really, it's not the threat they're saying it is. I don't want the Islamists to have nukes any more than the next guy. But I don't know if it was this immediate existential threat.
Well, I try to be fair and balanced on this issue. A lot of the people I bring on tend to more so sympathize with the Iranian perspective, especially recently. The consensus view is that Iran has malintent with respect to, their ambitions within the region. So it's good to have a countervailing perspective on the channel with respect to this issue. So I definitely appreciate you sharing your
Yeah.
views today.
I would just say real quickly, I do believe that we, both the United States and Israel, I am more sympathetic probably to the Israeli position, but I have no doubt in my mind that we initiated this war, and I don't know if it was necessary. This very much feels like another war of choice. I think we could have waited maybe 18 months to do this, if at all. And I think
So would
that's
you
the
say
real
you're
tragedy.
in like Camp Tucker then, or where would you put
No,
yourself?
I would say that I'm in my own camp as always. Everybody hates me, so no, I'm in Team Reality, and Team Reality is, just giving a second here. I'll explain my thoughts. 2 points are true. Iran's regime, they don't like us. They've been at war with us using terrorism and asymmetrical, capabilities, not direct war, for 40 years. Letting them get a nuke would be very bad. It's not good. Or get more sophisticated nukes. It's not good for the world. It's not good for us. Having said that, the United States cannot afford a war right now. And it is a violation. This war is a violation of Donald Trump's singular promise to MAGA going back to 2016 when he vowed no new Middle East wars. This is very much a war of choice. If what I'm hearing is correct, that Donald Trump conspired for weeks and months to plot this war, that this wasn't him being dragged in unwillingly and unwittingly by Israel, and it looks like this was a plan. If that's true, then this is a war of choice by definition. This is as bad as George W. Bush's war of choice in Iraq. And I think that's a mistake. I think we could have waited 18 months to see where things go, to give real diplomacy a chance. Having said that, though, yes, I'm not okay with, I don't like the regime in Iran, and I think that it's a very uncomfortable reality if we have to live with Iranian bombs.
Yeah, well, I'll have to see. There's a lot of conflicting points of view with respect to what regime change would look like, who would usurp power in that situation, whether it would just become wildly unstable. And
I
what
think
the
that's what's
Russians,
going to happen, wildly unstable.
yeah, and what the
There was a point in history, by the way, when that happened. I want to say it was in the 1800s. There was I think the Shah was removed, or there was a coup attempt. I'm trying to remember my Iranian history, but I know in the mid 1800s there was a period where the Russian Cossacks moved in and basically supported the Shah directly because the country had fallen apart under his rule. And so this wouldn't be the first time in Iranian history where the country loses its powerful central authority and it sort of becomes this multi-sided mess. And that, the Lebanization of Iran, which could very well be in the offing in the next 18 months.
Interesting. Now, you also wrote a book called Winning Space, and I just wanted to quickly get your take on this Golden Dome stuff. Would it work? And is it, what are your thoughts on it? Because I'm not sure if we talked about that the last time you were on.
We touched on it. It was sort of in the back end like it is now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are on how that's progressing.
Well, I advocated for this in the book. The book came out in September of 2020. I wrote most of the book 2018, 2019. So this is something I've advocated for years. I just think that it would have been nice if we did this sooner. Better late than never. But if anybody thinks this system is going to be online and useful in the next 18 months, I've got some swampland I could sell you. This is a massive undertaking. This is like the Manhattan Project on steroids. It's going to require, it's a defensive system for a large continental target, North America. It's a defensive system that requires ground-based, sea-based, air-based, and space-based sensors and interceptors. This is going to take at least 10 to 15 years to really do properly. I know Trump says he's going to have it done by the end of his term. But he's a realtor by training. He's selling the dream. I can tell you that much. So we are not in any way going to be able to depend on this system anytime soon. It needs to happen, but we're going to need to live in a world where America remains vulnerable to the kinds of hypersonic weapons and ballistic missile attacks that we're seeing, Russia be subjected to, and we're seeing Israel and Iran and Ukraine being subjected to, simply because we haven't prioritized this. It needs to happen, but we're nowhere near ready for showtime. We might never will be, by the way, because of how the bureaucracy works or doesn't work.
And so this is theoretically then supposed to be able to defend against hypersonics and the new class of
the key element here, because since Reagan they've been building or trying to build traditional ballistic missile defense, and we have some BMD interceptors in Alaska, and so we have worked on this for a while. But the key element of the new Golden Dome is hypersonic weapons, because as it stands, not only does the United States not have working arsenals of hypersonic weapons the way our enemies have, we don't have any active defense against them. I went out to a West Coast base that's in charge of basically the entire West Coast defense, air defense. And the commander out there, the colonel out there, told me point blank, he goes, "We are intercepting things coming in from the Pacific. We don't know what they are. They're rapidly moving. We suspect they're hypersonic tests and drones, but we can't stop it. We don't have systems that can track and shoot down reliably. Even when they do track, they can't shoot them down because they're too fast and they're too maneuverable. These systems that are coming into CONUS, that's continental United States. So this is a big and it's not just our problem, because this base hosts also Canadian military, and the Canadian military is very much involved with us in the air defense of North America. This is a Canadian problem as well. So we've got our work cut out for us. And in order to properly intercept hypersonic weapons, you're going to need sensors up in space, and you're going to need interceptors up in space, because that's probably the best place to intercept incoming hypersonic weapons.
And sorry, just to clarify, you said that there were objects coming into continental U.S. airspace?
Yeah, this would have been back in 2021. I was brought out because I talk a lot about Chinese hypersonic weapons and what we call exotic technology development. And
they're firing missiles in this direction? Or?
The U.S. is intercepting, or was at that time, craft and systems that they were not fully aware of.
Oh, intercepting, so not shooting down.
Not necessarily shooting down. I don't know if there's any shoot down orders, but they saw them. They would occasionally deploy, but the systems that they were tracking would be gone before the planes got there. There was some odd things, and they brought me out because they know that I track Chinese and Russian exotic technology development, and they were basically asking me, like, is it possible that they've leapfrogged us in, say, hypersonic technology, drone technology? And I walked them through everything I know that they're investing in China, and yes, it is very possible that they've leapfrogged us, notably the Chinese.
What do you think the Russian response is going to be to this space warfare stuff?
Well, I can tell you 2 weeks ago, before the war began, I was supposed to be brought on to News Nation to talk about this, but obviously the breaking news changed it. But we tracked, I tracked through a colleague of mine who's involved with space defense for the U.S. military, the NGA. He told me that the Russians launched a co-orbital satellite, Cosmos, I think 2548 is what it's designated as. It's a small satellite that tailgates our important systems. And I think the target was USA 688. I think it was an electro-optical surveillance satellite run by the National Reconnaissance Office. The Russians deployed this thing right after Ukraine's drone strikes into Russia. And the reason they did that was a warning to the United States, because everybody knows the reason those drone strikes in Russia in the Siberian region were so effective was because they were relying on U.S. Signals and geospatial intelligence of the kind that the satellite system in question that's being targeted by Russia provided. And so they got this Cosmos 2548, I think within 50 miles or 40 miles of the American system, which in space is very close. And how a co-orbital satellite works real quick is basically it tailgates our more expensive, sensitive, important systems in orbit. And at the drop of a hat, this thing can smash into our system. It can hack into it with grappling claws. And in fact, they did that. The Russians did that to a French military satellite in 2014. And they can disable those systems or just, spy on those systems and do significant damage to the constellation that our satellites are part of, in this case, a surveillance constellation, rendering us deaf, dumb, and blind.
Fascinating stuff. I just have one more question with respect to the Doomsday plane. I'm not sure if you heard about that
Yeah, I did.
thing, and that's
Washington, D.C., yeah.
Does that not strike you as a bit overkill in light of the fact that, we're talking about Iran here. They don't have ICBMs as far as we know. Why would you need a Doomsday plane?
Well,
Is that just a
this is a pretty big
formality?
war. This is a pretty big war. This is not just like you're fighting ISIS here. I suspect it's an airborne command center. I suspect this is just preparation. This is a fail-safe and contingency. But I will tell you, I think the day or maybe either the day before or the day after, an emergency action message, EAM, went out across the Air Force's high-frequency communications network. It was 268 characters. Nobody knew what it meant. Somebody leaked it to the social media, and this was a real message that was sent out.
Yeah, I talked about it, actually, yeah.
Yeah, and I believe it was a nuclear readiness preparation because I think we had intelligence that somebody in the Middle East war, either Iran or Israel, were preparing to use nukes. And that was around the time that the Iranians were threatening Dimona. So I suspect this is part of another, we're detecting or anticipating some kind of significant escalation in the coming days, and they want to have the Doomsday plane available for the National Command Authority.
Interesting. Brandon, where can people find more information about you?
You can find me on Twitter at WeTheBrandon. You can find my books anywhere they're sold. Probably best to go on Amazon, type in my name, Brandon Wiechert, Weichert. You'll find all 4 of my books there. And I'm also published 4 times a day every week at the nationalinterest.org.
Are your books in Audible format?
Not yet. I have been begging my publishers to license it out. They keep dragging their feet. Probably because I make more money off the audiobooks. So,
okay.
Yeah. It's a 50-50
I've been
split.
trying to consume as much content as possible, and I oftentimes consume it in 1.5 speed.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
I can't read that fast because I'm not a speed reader. So,
believe me, I know.
But I'm going to post links to your books.
I'm thinking about maybe just sitting down and actually doing my own audiobook at this point.
Yeah, I mean, you could pay probably somebody to do it.
Yeah, I've looked into it. It's a licensing issue. I want to make sure that I'm not going to get in trouble with the publisher.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, I'm going to post links to those books. Fascinating stuff. And thanks for coming out. And
thank you, sir.
We'll definitely be having you back for sure.
I'm sure. The world is only getting bleaker.
Yeah. Let's hope that we get another opportunity at this rate.
Yes, sir.
All right. You take care.
You too.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.